Kanonkop has a rich history also, and also this with some famous winemakers. Can you tell us a bit more about Kanonkop, its history and its winemakers?
I think one of the most fantastic things about Kanonkop, so everybody involved here really, you feel like you're part of one big family. And we're just under, I think we're around 65 people that work on the property. And for a winery that's been making wine since the 40s, and our brand started in 1973. That was the first vintage that labeled that the name Kanonkop appeared on a wine label. And we've only had 3 winemakers since then. So Jan Boland Krige was our first winemaker. Obviously, at the time, he was also a Springbok rugby player. So whether he made wine during the day and played rugby at night, or vice versa, that's what he did. And he's a very colourful and very interesting personality to chat to, and hugely knowledgeable. And you can still ask him now, so what was the vintage like in 75? And he'll be able to tell you, oh, it was this or that, and so much rainfall, it was a dry year, or this was a challenge. And he remembers each and every one. It's incredible. So we have a really long history of very, I'd say, big characters, big personalities, and also hugely talented winemakers that have worked on the property. But we've actually only, as I said, had 3. So Jan Boland was our first. And then obviously he left to take over the reins at Friesenhof, and where he carried on making wine there. And then Beyers joined us in 1980. And then obviously in the 80s, tough time for wine industry in South Africa, and obviously everyone still under apartheid, but it was under the curatorship, or under the winemaking or the cellar master of Beyers, that Kanonkop really started to become well known. And Beyers was also responsible for making the first vintage of Paul Sour. So Paul Sour started in 81, which is our flagship Bordeaux blend, and he was the winemaker to make the very first one. And Beyers, we still see him around on the property quite often. Him and Aubrey are really good friends, and we do joint tastings with them. And often when I travel overseas, we'll do pinotage masterclasses or pinotage events, and Kanonkop and Beyers Cliff would be involved. So he's very much sort of a presence on the property, and we see him often. And also a very personable guy. He's incredibly good storyteller, and he's very engaging, and people can relate to him. So on top of being a great winemaker, he also has a great personality that people love to chat to and enjoy. And Beyers was our winemaker up until 2003, and then Aubrey joined. Aubrey, who's our current winemaker, was actually making wine at Swartland Co-op. And Beyers met him, and he brought Aubrey on as his assistant in 2002. And then Beyers fell ill over harvest, so Aubrey ended up doing the 2003 vintage on his own. And then Beyers later left, and he went over to Beyers Cliff. And Beyers Cliff at the time was a winery and a cellar that the owners of Kanonkop and Beyers owned together. And then later the Kriges sold off their portion. But so Beyers, effectively, he went over to his own winery, which he still has today. And then Aubrey took over as winemaker from 2003, and is our winemaker still today. So for a winery that's been making wines for all these years, only to have 3 winemakers is really significant from a legacy point of view, from a consistency of style point of view, but also from a great understanding of what the property and what the vineyards have to offer. A vineyard, it takes a long time for you to understand what one particular vineyard is going to give you. What a dry looks like versus a wet season, what cover crops work well, and then which vineyards do you combine best, what barrels to use, what barrels you combine best. So I think Aubrey has an incredible knowledge of the property, and that would be difficult to pass on, and it takes personal experience and working with all of those elements for many years to have a true understanding, and that's part of what makes Kanonkop so successful. And the other thing is that each of those winemakers have made a Kanonkop style of wine. They haven't made their own style, if I could put it that way. So if you taste through 40 years of Kanonkop wines, and you didn't know where one winemaker finished and another started, you'd be hard pressed to find, where one winemaker started and the other one finished, because there's such an incredible consistency and Kanonkopness, consistency of style through all of those wines. So the Kanonkop is a family-owned winery. Johann and Paul Krige, that own the property, two brothers. And they inherited the farm from their mom, who was a Sauer, and her father was Paul Sauer, and his father was J.W. Sauer. So it's a fourth generation family property that passed from the Sauer to Krige family through marriage. And we've always kept things quite simple. And simple, I don't mean in a lack of complexity way. I just mean that we're really focused. And Johann always stipulates, that's his ethos. We talked about being back to the future. So he does what he does well. We do what we do well. We don't try and reinvent the wheel. We don't have restaurants, hotels, big events, big functions. That's not what we're about. We're a winemaking property. We have a great cellar. We focus on red wines, and even more so, we focus on two great varieties, Pinotage and Cabernet. So we like to keep things quite simple and uncomplicated, and focus on what we do well. And I think that's had a very big impact on the business and on the cellar and how we do things. And I think it also puts us a little bit aside from some of the wineries that do a whole host of things. I mean, you could find wineries that do everything from sparkling to port, sweet and dry, white and red, and that becomes difficult and it becomes complicated when trying to bring across a brand message and trying to build a portfolio. So I've always enjoyed Johann's approach in that, is that we do what we do and we do it well and to the best of our ability. And if we do something that we can't do best, we just stop doing it, basically. So in the 80s, we were a complete fruit salad. We grew Sauvignon and Chenin and Pinot Noir. It was decided that we were never going to make the best Sauvignon. We were never going to make the best Pinot Noir. So why try? Stop, focus on what we do well, and build success on it. And I think, that gives you some idea of the background and where we've come from. And if you look at our portfolio, we make the most wines now we've ever made. So we have a rosé, which is the only non-red, which is made 100% from Pinotage in the Cadet range. Then we have the Cape blend, which was the original Cadet. It came out as Cadet Dry Red or Druroy, and it was effectively everything not good enough to be part of the top estate wines. And the first vintage we made of the Cape blend was 1985. Then we released the Cadet Pinotage in 2013. And now, last year, we released a Cadet Cabernet Sauvignon for the first time, which is currently exclusive to Woolworths and to our cellar door. And then in the estate wines, we have the estate Pinotage and Cabernet, which were the first two wines we made. Both started in 73. The Paul Sauer, as I mentioned, in 81. And then the Black Label Pinotage, which is a single vineyard Pinotage, which we released for the first time in 2006.